And with that, Shane, let me hand over to you for our discussion.
Great. Thank you, David. Appreciate it. And again, great to see Brian and Nikki back. So, we've covered a wide range of topics in today's webinar, and I think hopefully it's been a great learning experience for everyone participating. But maybe I'll pivot back to you, Brian, right? So one of the topics, obviously, you're a very experienced coach and a very senior executive. We're good friends from Swiss Re days. From a sense of is coaching is it really an underdeveloped muscle, both at an individual level and a corporate level? Could you give us a sense of how prevalent is coaching among executives, particularly executives who transfer into become good leaders?
I think, Shane, it's a really good question, and I think there are a couple of elements to it. One, I think for any person who's in a leadership role, having somebody that you can talk to, that you trust, to give you feedback on the challenges you're facing, how you're coming through, is just super important. I mean, I think anybody who's on this call who's ever been in a leadership role recognizes it can be sort of a lonely spot to be in. You feel like you're responsible for everything. You feel like you have limited control. You feel tons of pressure. So having somebody to talk to give you that feedback on your performance and how the team is receiving you, your strategies for reaching the team, your strategies for doing your leadership work, super important. That could be through a mentor. That could be through a sponsor in your organization. It can also be through somebody like myself and others who, work with people we don't really know all the time, but we work in a professional capacity to coach and to hopefully help them work on specific, let's say, leadership competencies or approaches to leadership where they feel like, or their organization is telling them, gosh, it's just not as good as it could be. Let's go work on that.
Yeah, no, that's great. No, thanks for that, Brian. Nikki, I'm going to pivot to you a little bit just on one of the questions. And actually the question could apply to both of you, but we'll start with Nikki. There's a famous saying, I believe it's by Peter Drucker, that used to say that culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? And obviously in sort of high performing teams, culture is really important. So could you give us a sense, do you agree with that statement, culture eats strategy for breakfast? And, what's the most important part of culture in that sort of high performing team dynamic?
Sorry, I just got mute for the moment. So absolutely, everything is defined by culture. That is why you hear a lot this saying cultural fit, which is very critical. A lot of people underestimate it. I do believe that high performance, you could only build high performing team in a highly collaborative culture. And that culture is driven from the top. I've seen the situation where, for example, all the decisions are being made at the top behind the closed doors. And basically, you just execute the decision which is being made. And in some companies are like that. But to me, if we're building high performance, especially in our world, and we have a lot of young people who want to own things, who want to be decision makers, we need to create culture who allows them to do that. It's a completely different generation from generation where we just had to work hard and that's important. No, it's a generation very different. We want to own decision, we want to drive, we want to have independence. And if you don't have culture like this, you're going to lose people.
Yeah, no, thanks for that, Nikki. And Brian, say maybe the same question to you from but your sort of broad leadership experience and coaching experience. Could you talk a little bit more about that cultural dynamic and how important it is?
Sure. So maybe building on Nikki's comments, I think culture is a keystone topic for organizations. And the way I think about this, and I talk about it with senior leaders, is actually culture is what's happening when you're not in the room. So how do people work together? How do they align? How do they collaborate? How do they prioritize when they're not being observed by the most senior leaders? Organizations that have a strong culture are ones where when the senior leader is not in the room, they're driving the right things. They're driving towards growth. They're driving towards accountability. They're driving towards customer service. They're really driving independently towards the overall objectives of the organization. That's a company with a strong culture. And those are companies, I think, organizations that tend to win more than they lose. On the opposite side, if the most senior Apex leaders have to be in the room to get people to do the basics, you've got a pretty weak culture. And chances are there's a great opportunity to really focus on that and work on that and hopefully get better as a group.
Yeah, no, that's really great commentary, Brian. I mean, one of the topics I've read, I think I've seen it a few times, is that a lot of people describe culture in their organization of how the employees feel about going to work on a Sunday evening. So how do they feel about the anticipation about Monday morning on a Sunday night? And as you say, like, you know, you get that culture of our leaders doing the right thing when nobody's looking, right? Are doing the right things when the chief executive or the head of the department is not in the room at the same time. But maybe it also, like, just sticking to culture for a moment. You know, one of the topics that can happen in teams, particularly with a new leader, what happens if you inherit a team that's perhaps underperforming, that's disengaged, that you've got a kind of a poor culture? Could you give some advice to, you know, a new leader or someone who's come into a dynamic that feels uncomfortable? And maybe start with you, Nikki. Just I know you've had experience in sort of, you talked about high performing teams and how you deal with those sort of challenges, and then also probably pivot to Brian as well.
Still, Shane. So a lot of people would probably think it's a disadvantage when you come into a new team which is not performing well, but you also have an advantage because this is your opportunity to create a new impression and sometimes to change the way the team works. First of all, and I did talk about this previously, you need to understand what makes individual team members tick. So I would have one to understand the dynamics of the team, and I'll tell you, if as a new leader, you're going to try to get to know the team, we will appreciate it. We will tell you everything you need to know, what's working and what's not working. And that's a question you need to ask. Because the benefit you have, you don't have the history that we may have with the old leaders. We could tell you, you know what, the old leader micromanaged and everything like that, which you talked about. So collect the information privately, analyze it, assess, and then decide what you want to do next. Create the open forum as well, and this is really how you could change the way the team operates.
No, thanks, Nikki. Brian, what would you add to that?
Yeah, so just building on Nikki's comments, which I fully endorse, I think anytime somebody takes over a new team, a couple of recommendations from me. First of all, diagnose, am I dealing with a burning platform, yes or no? If the business is kind of driving off a cliff or is on fire, you need to move with quite a lot of urgency on a number of topics. Assuming that's not the case, then the thing that you raised, Shane, I would recommend to people, you should spend a lot more time asking than telling. You should not be rushed to decisions about people, team, direction. You should be out there talking, as Nikki said, to the people, asking what's working, what's not, and asking why, but also talk to stakeholders inside the firm, talk to peers, find friends, build. Every little bit of data you get about your team is a mosaic tile. It has a color, but it doesn't really tell you much. Over time, if you can accumulate enough of those tiles, you get a picture. And then you start to say, here's where I think we're going. Here's where I think we're missing. There's also an opportunity to play back that picture to your team, to your peers, to your bosses to say, here's what I'm seeing. Here's what I'm hearing. Do you agree? And once you feel like you're actually dealing with something approaching truth, a clear lens on the challenges, then you can start taking action and you can start moving the team with you towards a different destination, hopefully.
Great. No, thanks for that, Brian. I'm going to pivot to a slightly different topic. I'm conscious we probably only have about 5 or 6 minutes left. before we get into the sort of wrap up. But obviously the topic of AI is out there, and AI is looms. The shadow of AI looms across every role and every leadership role and every team globally these days. But if we explore the topic of AI and leadership, how does a leader adopt and adapt to working with AI and yet still retain the sort of characteristics and the behaviors that make them a great leader? I'm just curious to get perspective from both of you. And again, I'm happy to start with you, Brian, and then we'll pivot to Nikki. But yeah, just talk about AI, the dynamic of AI and leadership.
Shane, I'd like to locate AI in a sort of a broader sweep. And that broader sweep is irrespective of when you came into the business world, there was something in the environment that was disruptive. Once upon a time, that disruption felt like automation. Once upon a time, that disruption felt like outsourcing, nearshoring, offshoring. There's always something in terms of something which is unsettling the business environment, of which AI is the most recent, let's say, addition. I think leaders have an obligation. Again, part of what your role is to tell the story. So telling the story here says, well, look, AI is a new thing on the scene. We're going to spend some time understanding it, but we're also going to spend some time understanding how we can use it as a tool to get better at our craft, to get better at the thing we do, to get better at delivering services to our clients, to get better at precision. There's a lot of things we can use it to get better. Of course, people are going to come back and say, or at least think, God, this thing is going to eliminate my job. I'm screwed. But part of your job as a leader is to, again, locate it inside of a context, which is business is always changing. There's always a wolf at the door. And our job is, as a group of leaders, is to make sure our organization is fit for purpose to deal with that particular wolf, knowing its cousin is coming next week. So that's what I would encourage people to think about. It is a continuum of change that AI is a part of. It's not the only change that businesses have ever had to come to grips with. Leaders own the responsibility for that interpretation.
Thank you for that, Brian. And Nikki, from your perspective, AI and the leadership dynamic, what are your thoughts?
I would say inspire by example. I spent some time at Amazon where it was about automation. So a lot of time I tell my team, the people who will implement AI, who could implement AI and make it happen, it's you. So let's identify the situation when you're frustrated, you're spending too much time, Excel spreadsheet. How could we implement visualization tool? And I'm here to help. For example, the other day I said someone was trying to come up with visualization tool. I said Power BI or Tableau. Why don't we get your license and do that, right? Or some automating policies and procedures, putting all the policies, procedures with the accounting policy, operational procedures into some AI tool. I think the most important thing for me from the leadership perspective is to inspire the team to have this process improvement mindset versus doing it myself, to make sure I make them think how we could make their life easier and more innovative.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate both your comments. And I would certainly add that, I think it's, AI is out there, it's incumbent upon anyone that thinks they are a leader to really embrace that technology. It's okay to sort of go into the unknown, but if you embrace it as a leader and you sort of encourage your team members to become expert at it and to sort of share ideas and perspectives and know-how, again, it's one of those shared objectives that I think really propels a team to be a high-performing team. Again, one of the things I've seen is that sometimes like experienced managers and leaders, to some extent, obviously, they have AI. They have a lot of ideas and thoughts. And when you sort of use tools like GPT and some of the other tools that are out there, you actually have a good sense of what you're looking for, but you maybe in the past weren't able to quite do it. Now it's sort of being served back to you. So I actually think it's a bit of an adapt or die moment for leaders. but also for certain functions. I mean, again, I have a lot of experience in internal audit functions, and every internal audit function, like most other teams, are absolutely investing heavily in AI to sort of, transform the work, make it more efficient, focus on things that really matter. And I think it's just again, it's the current unsettling topic as Brian described. But again, its cousin is sort of just around the corner, right? So whatever AI 2.0 will be. With that, I'm just conscious of time, David. So I think it's probably time that we wrap up. But maybe I'll just ask sort of Brian and Nikki just for a couple of words and sort of final, like just 30 seconds, just key takeaways you'd want people to take away from today's webinar.
So if I go, I just jump in there, Shane. So I think hopefully what people have heard is some good information about how to think about leadership as a craft and some specific things in terms of, let's say, one's leadership role in terms of setting culture, setting expectations. And the thing I would just like to, again, remind people of, I think some of the best leaders in the world are the ones who ask more than they tell, who really engage the human beings working for them and pull those people along through their engagement. And as Nikki said earlier, inspiring them.
I would echo Brian as well, because as a leader, you set the tone for your team success. And again, as I mentioned before, without our teams, we cannot really achieve a lot. And always remember that. Set the culture for the team to be successful, because it is the most important role for you as a leader.
That's great. And I would probably just add, accentuate the informal, particularly if you're an assurance leader. Play to the informal sense to build trust and relationships, and that will only make your formal work even stronger and connecting better with your clients. With that, we'll go to the final poll and to David for final remarks.
Yeah, we're at time, but if you've got a few minutes, let's stay on for the final poll. Sorry we ran a little long there. The final poll is, I am focused on enhancing my leadership skills. Do you agree, disagree, or don't know? And while you're answering the poll, let me say a big thank you to our presenters and to you, our attendees. Before you exit, please fill in the feedback survey available on screen. We also look forward to you joining us at our next event on July the 17th, where we will be looking at redoing one of the most popular webinars we have ever done, which is on becoming a US CPA if your institute has an MRA with AICPA and NASBA. We did the original almost 5 years ago, after South Africa got their MRA, and this time we're covering the same ground but updating it to reflect the current program. And now, let's close the poll. And the results are 99% agreeing. And with that, thank you all and goodbye.